it's an opportunity for the local governments to step up and say, look, you want to play in my market, you've got to abide by our rules. It's not just a Western playing field anymore.
In compliance, innovation often gets framed as a trade-off, move fast or stay safe. But the reality is more interesting. The organizations building resilience compliance programs today are doing both, moving faster because they are building smarter controls, better data, and stronger feedback loops. Today's guest, Barbara Tsai, is a compliance leader at Microsoft, based in Singapore, with experience spanning public sector work, private practice, and a well-regulated Swiss financial institution with a focus on anti-financial crime and anti-bribery and corruption. In our conversation, we explore what's changing in compliance across Asia, why reading the room matters as much as reading the rulebook, and how AI can turn compliance into a true innovation. This is BCG on Compliance, a podcast that explores today's most pressing financial crime and compliance trends, and how compliance professionals are adapting to stay ahead of that curve. I'm Hanjo Seibert. Innovation and compliance isn't about chasing shiny tools. It's about building advantage, detecting risks earlier, scaling controls faster, and freeing people to focus on judgment. This doesn't change, regardless of where you are in the world. When you shift the focus a little bit from the regulatory requirements towards the actual business and the market conditions, what are some of the Asia-specific business risks that you now need to manage and look at when thinking about the business in Asia?
When I look at our business and how I counsel, our senior leaders, it's not just about saying you're doing things compliantly. It's not even about doing things compliantly. It's about reading the market, reading the room, understanding what is at play here, both from the perspective of, say, geopolitical tensions and what that means for the actual commercial operations. We regularly conduct horizon scans to detect enforcement trends. And I won't say majority of the time, but a lot of the times, if you dig a little deeper and you go below the surface level, there are a lot of motivations at play. It's useful to unravel the true motivations behind any particular local enforcement action. For example, if there's a dawn raid or if there's an anti-corruption investigation, why company A, not company B or C? I'd say if you dig a little deeper, you might find that an anti-corruption investigation could coincide with ongoing disputes with a major state-owned interest. There could be bilateral trade negotiations taking place or about to take place. And this could just be a signal to the other side or to the market that, hey, this is a time to be cautious, right? So from a business strategy perspective, sometimes amidst all of this chaos, it's not a good time to push hard. And so from a compliance perspective or a risk appetite perspective, it's also something that we look at across the markets in which we operate in.
And with that international view, we speak a lot in compliance, or in this podcast also, we center quite naturally have a bias towards speaking a lot about North America and Europe. If you look also at your experience at the Swiss bank, which I think you've done in Asia, and your role you have now, what's some of the differences, or what should people be mindful of when they think about compliance, North America and Europe versus Asia? What's some of the differences you see certainly that one should focus when thinking about compliance in Asia versus the Western world, North America, Europe?
That's such a good question. I'd take it back a little bit in time. And, I'd say in terms of the evolution across the last quarter century, I've been living and practicing in Asia for around that time. When all of this first started, compliance was sort of a nice to have in the early 2000s, particularly as a notion in Asia. It really wasn't a lever that was being used regularly by the local governments. But now you see it as part of, campaigns. You see it across Asia in terms of what the government is doing. There's a larger responsibility to create a level playing field for local players and international players. There was a time when mentioning the US FCPA was enough to get everyone to pay attention. But these days, it's sort of like it's given an opportunity to shift from a more Western-focused dialogue when it comes to compliance and regulatory enforcement. And it's an opportunity for the local governments to step up and say, look, you want to play in my market, you've got to abide by our rules. It's not just a Western playing field anymore. I've dealt with situations where the local criminal system was abused by influential, connected market players in order to extract favorable commercial outcomes. I'll explain what exactly that means. One tactic that I've seen being used is having a local police summons being served on the responsible person at the company. And by responsible person, I mean the person responsible for the company itself, not the person responsible for the action. And the police summons will probably claim some alleged personal criminal activity like fraud or bribery, any of those key buzzwords, usually without any basis. And if you dig a little deeper, once I get on the phone or I start asking some questions, I then find out, probably right in the middle of a hugely contested piece of commercial litigation. And this is a way for the other party, who's, again, very closely connected with the local government, to get an expedited out of court settlement in their favor. So the question then becomes, what do you do? You have to answer the police summons. What do? You stall for time. You obviously hire competent local lawyers to help defend you. You try to get extensions. And above all else, you try to look for opportunities potentially to settle the commercial aspects of it. And eventually, I think that's the aha moment. You kind of think, well, was this really necessary? Could we have just done this and settled it out of court as a commercial matter and not have involved the local police? But these are some of the levers that you'll see market players employing, and something that you really have to be careful about, because if you make a wrong move, you exercise an error in judgment, you can have people who are completely innocent being put in jail.
When innovation means building and expanding into new places, you have to make sure that your compliance policies are watertight, especially in the face of business practices that are foreign to you. In practice, what does that stronger enforcement mean for global companies operating across a variety of jurisdictions? So is it that preparedness that you're speaking about? Is it those levers that you mention? Or is there also some other things that companies can do to prepare for?
Yeah. I'm going to step a little out of my lane here and say that your HR decisions are super important. You get the right people in place at the local level that know how to navigate the local landscape, but in a compliant way. So you got to screen, you got to do your market research before you make those key hires. At the same time, you've got to have local legal support. It could be your GC, it could be your assistant GC, and compliance all in lockstep, understanding what the business strategy is in that market, the players you're dealing with, the right and wrong people to interact with, and what to do when you're in crisis management mode. Because certainly this is crisis management mode when that happens. And the worst thing to do would be not to involve your advisors, your legal advisors, your compliance advisors, and try to deal with it on your own, which can happen if you don't have trust across that relationship and you don't have the right people in place. So that would be, I think, what I would say in response to how you staff is super important, because it sets the tone for your culture. It sets the tone for your responsiveness. And of course, it helps to drive your business there in a compliant way. I've also thought about other aha moments that I've had in my work. I can, again, an anonymized type of story, but in some cases, local interest groups such as grassroots rural committees or community or self appointed leaders that either picket, petition, or use outright physical obstruction to prevent access to development sites or to workplaces. In some cases, they usually would go away if you give in to their demands. And usually those demands are grounded on some minor payment. So again, it's super important that the people you have that are on those sites or locations have been properly trained. It's important that they understand that they can't make those payments. And it's important that they have that trust that if they report these types of incidents happening, that they themselves will get in trouble for reporting, and that they feel protected by their management chain to take the right decisions.
What are best practices in investigations, and how are they evolving, and how are you expecting or already seeing the use of AI in these areas to improve or enhance the work in investigations in the compliance space?
I think there was a time in the market, particularly in legal and compliance, where, and it's still ongoing, where there are vendors out in the market with all sorts of products with a generative AI basis that's promised to give you and deliver you a end-to-end compliance program. What we're seeing is a shift from using the general purpose technology that's available and pivoting that for your own specific use. So, for example, in house, we've developed our own models using our general purpose technology across risk detection. We use it to build and track patterns, signals, and anomalies across large data sets. This could include sales data, consumption data, internal and external ecosystem, infractions and violations. We also do a lot of AI skilling workshops that we leverage service providers to help give us, or we partner with each other and share best practices. So that's a very easy sort of first step in terms of understanding. The other piece of it is when I have conversations with other GCs or other in house compliance leaders, we talk about the different tools that are available on the market. And this is probably not something that they want me to amplify loudly because I'm not a consumer in that way. But I understand that you can use these products, you can use these services free of charge for a period of time so you can assess. And I think it's always super important to ask questions. It's okay. Like we're all learning this together. And the curiosity and having the ability to be open-minded and to test out new products, new services, and to understand is super important.
If the technology is changing the tools, the next question is, what is the right operating model? Barbara's take is that compliance needs both tech speed and banking's rigor and frameworks. One thing I would personally be very interested in, because I get asked the question quite a bit, is comparing banking and tech. So when I work for tech or media companies, they tell me, well, banking has it much easier because it's regulated. They have a lot of pressure from the regulators. So there's no awareness building that I, as a compliance professional, need to do with my board or general management. Versus in banking, people say, oh, if only we would be in a less regulated environment so we don't have to respond to all the silliness, but could really focus on managing risks and what really matters, rather than to abide to 15 different jurisdictions, regulators, supervisors, etc. From your perspective, having worked in both spaces, is there maybe a common ground or a best of both worlds where you could say, take a bit of that and a bit of that? And what would that be that you would take from each of the industries you've seen?
That's an interesting question. As I reflect on my time in banking, I'd say there's a lot of reactiveness to regulatory scrutiny and regulatory observations. It may or may not be correct or accurate, but it is the regulatory view, and therefore you follow it. In tech, what I have seen and I have appreciated about it is an ability to react to what I see in the market, what I see as trends, and to shape the compliance dialogue together with my business leaders so that they understand the why for what we are doing, right? In the perfect world, though, if you combine the two, I'd like to see a little more rigor when it comes to program, when it comes to frameworks in the tech space, responsive to compliance all up. So borrowing across that rigor in terms of framework and regulation and tracking that is responsive to regulatory requirements, but in a space that actually is not subject to that.
And Barbara, if maybe you look at some of your own arguments, what are some of the tips you could give if I was a compliance professional at a media or tech company and not have this support from my general management? What are some of the arguments or points you could use or you have maybe used before to raise that awareness, to increase the understanding of importance for doing compliance well, even if there is no regulator and supervisor who's pushing you?
It's actually been super refreshing for me to see at my current company the proactiveness from our business side in terms of understanding the compliance risks and wanting to do things compliantly. That being said, I have found I'm a big fan of real life case studies, anonymized, of course, in keeping with our theme, But I'm a big fan of reading out to our business the results of our investigations or our findings or the trends that we observe and letting them know in real time, like these are the live issues that you're dealing with. This is happening in another part of the region, this is happening in a similar business in another part of the world. These are our top of mind concerns that actually we want to help protect you and protect the company again so that we can continue doing business. So we do that all the time. I give them readouts on case studies and getting that information live. I think when you have a black box and you don't provide information, that's when problems can occur. But when you have transparency and you provide real time information so that people can be responsive to those needs, that's when the business can go forward and do business compliantly. And there's longevity there as well.
What do you think about the next big challenges for compliance professionals in Asia?
I think it comes down to skilling. It comes down to AI skilling. Whether we like it or not, no matter how many debates we participate in, AI is here to stay and it's only going to get better. So then the differentiating factor becomes, how skilled are you in using the AI? How do you make it work for you? And what is your value add along that value chain? How can you use your experience, your judgment, your acumen, and your ability to advise your business to act in the most compliant way, but also to drive the business forward? I think that that's going to be the differentiating factor.
Perfect. And I mean, no one has a crystal ball, but maybe to end this discussion, what would you like to see from organizations? What should they do better in the next 5 years?
In the ideal world, I'd like to see organizations operating and working closely with one another in order to develop best practices, right? I think the public-private dialogue and partnership is super important to get everybody aligned, both on the government side and on the private side. I'd like to see better collaboration between compliance professionals, building a complete ecosystem of compliance frameworks.
Are you building a compliance function that can scale with innovation and use AI to stay ahead of risk? Join the conversation by connecting with us on your podcast app, writing a review of the show, or emailing us at bcgonCompliance@bcg.com. I'm Hanjo Seibert. Thanks for listening.